My name is Elina Troschenko, and I work with the Global Research Program on Inequality, GRIP, which is a multidisciplinary research program dedicated to globally collaborative forms of research on various dimensions of inequality. And we at GRIP are very happy to host this exciting event. But before I introduce you to today's event and panelists, I need to provide you with some practical information. Firstly, this event will be recorded, as you probably heard, and it will be made available both on the SDG conference platform as well as on GRIP's website. So please just be aware of that. Secondly, we truly hope to make this into an interactive event, and therefore we will have a Q&A session later at this event, and we will organize it through the chat function. So please use the chat function to send questions to the panelists. And thirdly, we also kindly ask you to keep your microphones muted during the event. And now I would like to introduce both our panelists and tell you a bit more about this event. Leaving No Child and No Adolescent Behind is the call of a new book edited by Sudeshna Chatterjee, Alberto, Minujin, and Katie Hodgkinson. The book shines a spotlight on the world's most vulnerable populations, including children and adolescents living in poverty and exclusion. The book draws on experiences from around 35 countries and provides in-depth analysis of rich empirical evidence, while reflecting on the meaning of such terms as inclusion for those who are often left behind. And it also serves as a strong reminder for us that SDG targets and goals cannot be met unless we focus attention on pockets of inequality and deprivation. This important volume is a part of a book series on international studies in poverty research, initiated by the former comparative research program on poverty that in 2019 was transformed into GRIP. We at GRIP are very happy and honored to continue the wonderful collaboration with many great inequality scholars and to engage with their work, as this excellent book that not only provides insights on the ground realities and experiences of inequality, but also offers insights on methods how to measure and track progress against SDG targets. Today, we would like to use the opportunity to talk about the various topics covered by the book and to use the book as a springboard for discussion on new analyses and policies against inequality and exclusion, as well as to talk about strategies and innovations for implementing the SDGs. And now let me introduce our honored panelists. Sudeshna Chatterjee has worked in international development for nearly 20 years as a researcher, evaluator, and technical advisor. She founded the nonprofit Action for Children's Environments and has led many multi-country research projects related to children's environments. She co-led the global evaluation of Unicef's work on children in cities and led the writing of the global principles and guidance of public spaces for children for Unicef, World Health Organization, and UN Habitat. Currently, she's serving as the Director of Research for Sustainable Cities and Transport at WRI India Ross Center. Welcome, Sudeshna. Alberto Minujin is a professor at the New School University, New York, where he has taught in a study graduate program in international affairs. He also has 15 years experience from Unicef, and he is a mathematician with training in applied statistics and demography. Minujin is founding executive director of Equity for Children and Equidad para la Infancia, a nonprofit working to improve living conditions for poor, marginalized children. His research and teaching focuses on child poverty reduction and equality, monitoring and evaluation, human rights, and social policy. Welcome, Alberto. Margaret Daniel is professor of development-related health promotion at the University of Bergen, Norway, where she also leads a master's program in global development theory and practice. Daniel is a member of the Global Working Group for Saltogenesis of the International Union of Health Promotion Education. She currently has research projects in many various locations such as South Africa, Botswana, Ghana, and Norway. Welcome, Margaret. Enrique Della Monica is Statistics and Monitoring Senior Advisor for Child Poverty and Gender Equality at Unicef. He has held several posts at Unicef during the last 30 years, focusing on poverty reduction, social protection, financing social services, equity, and the impact of macroeconomic trends on child welfare. He has written and co-edited several books and articles on these issues. He has also taught economics, international development, policy analysis, statistics, and research methods at, among other places, such as New York University, Columbia University, the New School for Social Research, and St. Peter's College. He is at the board of Research Committee on Poverty, Social Welfare, and Social Policy of the International Sociological Association. Welcome, Enrique. And our final panelist is Thomas George, who is currently the global lead of Unicef Urban. George is a member of the UN Global Task Force on the Future of Cities and the expert group to develop the Global Urban Monitoring Framework. He is also a member of the steering committee for the Save the Children Global Alliance Cities for Children. And Thomas George has over 33 years of experience in international development, with 28 years in the United Nations in different countries. So once again, welcome to you all into this event. And now I would like to give word to one of the editors of the book, Alberto. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Elena. And I want to do a brief introduction of the process of the book, and I'm very happy that we are presenting this book at a conference in Bergen, an important conference in Bergen, because in fact, the process of producing, developing this book started in Bergen. I used to be member of the academic committee of CROP, that is the Comparative Research on Poverty, CROP, that now is the Global Research on Inequality. If I said, okay. But well, we were discussing about in one of the meetings of the committee, we were discussing about the SDGs, and we bring this idea that we cannot move, we cannot ensure the things, we cannot go ahead if we don't take children and adolescents in the center of the stage. In some way, taking all the thing that we produced in the 2000, when was the conference, the social conference, that poverty reduction start with children, in the sense of that we need to cut this transmission of poverty, and there is where we need to invest, and we can produce a change around the world. So we did a call for paper, and in 2018, and in 2018, in fall of 2018, we had a workshop of 2.5 days on a conference in New York at the New School University. And the title of the conference was Addressing Inclusion Among Children and Adolescents Living in Poverty: Progress Towards Achieving the Sustainability Development Goals. The conference was organized by Equity for Children, that is the organization that I am director and is part of the initiative. It's an initiative at the New School. It's a global organization, and we are working in issues related with child poverty, urban inequalities, and this was a perfect combination with CROP and the Bergen University. The committee select a group of papers. We had quite a number of papers that were presented. We select a group of papers, and we had a 2.5 days of meeting in New York, an intense meeting that some of the authors must remember. And during that workshop that we discussed each of the paper, and they were commented, and was a sort of peer review. Finally, from that, we select the book that today are part of we select the papers that today are part or conform this book. The book finally includes 9 of the papers that we cover different subjects and different regions and country experience. That was one of the things that we were looking for the scene. And what we were trying, and the objective was to explore main factors that cause exclusion and marginalization among children, adolescents, and families, with this imperative of not leaving no one behind. That's the idea, the main idea that we have with the book. And we want, and we produce, and I think that we finally succeed on putting in this book a series of experience that show way of measuring and way of looking and way of doing good practices on leaving non-children and adolescents behind. So that was the process that finally in 2022, even during the pandemic, we were working on this, and we produced finally this book that will be available, free available in the next month of March, if I'm not wrong. So with this introduction on how was the process, the editors, we work a lot, and we have the authors that were collaborating with us, because this passed several peer reviews. We had now, and today, we are happy of presenting this book. So I want to give Sudeshna, that is the other editor of the book, I want to give the floor to her to talk about the book. Thank you very, very much for being with us.
Thank you, Alberto. And very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has logged in. A very thank you to GRIP for giving us this opportunity and the platform to launch this book. I'm going to start a screen share. Okay. Oops, sorry. 1 second. Something happened. Can you see my screen?
No.
Oh.
It's just dark.
Yeah, I'm wondering what happened.
I think you're at the end of the slideshow.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, great. So the title of our book is Leaving No Child and No Adolescent Behind, a global perspective on addressing inclusion through the SDGs. So it couldn't have got a better platform for launch than the SDG conference here in Bergen. As Alberto already mentioned, we worked over the course of 2019 and the early part of 2020 with about 29 contributing authors to put together this collection of analytic papers. Our authors drew on experiences from mainly low and middle income countries to reflect on the meaning of inclusion for children and adolescents who are left behind, framing the discussion in the context of the SDGs. This book, we feel, really contributes to revealing the politics of inclusion and exclusion, and offers policy insights for overcoming inequality and exclusion among children and adolescents. The book is divided into 3 parts, but it also initially has this context setting chapter where we discuss how the future of our world over the next decade is being shaped by the Sustainable Development Goals, and how they seek to uphold children's well-being, and by the call of leaving no one behind, how it has the possibility of reaching the furthest behind first and really shine a spotlight on the world's most vulnerable populations, including children and adolescents living in poverty and exclusion. The transformative steps that are promised in the SDGs to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path assumes greater significance in the post-COVID world, where structural exclusions are starkly exposed, as we all saw, and deep societal inequalities thickly underlined. We discuss poverty, exclusion, urbanization, and violence in this first chapter against children and adolescents in the context of SDGs. After that, each part of the book includes 3 chapters. Together, these 9 chapters investigate how knowledge, information, data collection, measurement, and monitoring support strategies and innovations to effectively implement the SDGs by drawing on data and experience from 35 countries. In chapter 1, we explain why the SDGs are important for children and adolescents. Data from 2018 show that children in the 0 to 14 years age group actually comprise 1/4 of the global population. And 42% of these children live in low-income countries. Similarly, 16% of the world's population are made up of adolescents, that is 10 to 19-year-olds. So today's children and adolescents, the 0 to 19 years people in this age group, are the first generation to be born entirely in the 21st century. So any forward-looking development agenda must secure their future and must also reduce inequality in the lives of children and adolescents all over the world. The Sustainable Development Goals promise a lot to children. They promise to provide children and young people with services, with skills and opportunities to build better futures for themselves and their families and their societies. Even though children have more future years of life, as we all know, but they're also vulnerable to many risks when growing up in poverty and inequality. And they do depend on adults for care and protection. Caring for children requires, first of all, counting all children in social statistics and accounting for them in policies, as well as social progress plans that will protect those policies and provide the means for their realization. Though things have improved for children globally in terms of health and education, also digital literacy, but estimates show that by 2030, with the business as usual models, 70 million children under 5 will die from mostly preventable causes, and about 170 million children will live in poverty, and a shocking 750 million children will be married as children. So the call to leave no one behind and to reach the furthest first shines a spotlight on the world's most vulnerable populations living in poverty and exclusion. And this book really helps us in understanding some of these issues. I would also like to take a moment to say why adolescents are especially vulnerable. For the simple reason that many of the interventions for children actually focus on early years. For example, adolescents age out of the pediatric healthcare system, and they are also often unreached by programs for adolescents. They fall through the cracks. They also have, among other things, limited, especially adolescents growing up in poverty, have limited opportunities to gain skills and confidence. There are lots of barriers to education. They live in unsafe living environments, and They also lack access to sexual and reproductive health information and services. The World Health Organization has actually shown us that the mortality patterns that causes death among adolescents, and these are majorly road injuries, AIDS-related causes, suicide, lower respiratory tract infection, among others. The SDGs are very promising as they bring a renewed and expanded focus on adolescent health and well-being, such as through disease-specific interventions, improving road safety, greater alcohol and tobacco taxation, and increased access to education. In the book, we map out the SDG targets. All the targets have indicators related to them. So we map out the indicators for children's well-being. 35 of these indicators are directly related to children, and several more can be unpacked or modified to more directly include children. So this is, and we also show, who are the different agencies ranging across national governments to the UN organizations, for monitoring the progress on these SDGs across the world. So the theme of the first part of the book is mapping and monitoring urban communities, children and adolescents in poverty. The chapters in this section talk about the challenges of urbanization in deepening inequality and deprivation, and the ongoing efforts across the world to map and monitor the progress on the SDGs for urban children and adolescents in poverty. Not surprisingly, all the papers in this section address SDG 11, that implicitly recognizes the need for safe, inclusive, and resilient cities as the foundations for sustainable urban development. Children are mentioned twice in SDG 11 targets. In target 11.2, convenient access to public transport. And there are indicators on road safety in this, not surprising, as this is really the leading cause of death among adolescents. And target 11.7, which talks about access to safe, inclusive, and green public spaces. The key lessons from the papers in this section really are, first of all, the need for reliable, disaggregated local data. All the three papers really discuss this in great detail, that most vulnerable and the furthest behind children and adolescents are not counted in the typical surveys and the census style approaches to sampling. And this impedes the progress on issues of inclusion, which is really a key goal of the SDGs. The papers report on projects from 3 different countries, Colombia, India, and Thailand, where innovative decentralized models were developed to collect disaggregated local data to reveal inequalities experienced by disadvantaged urban children. The papers have these following, the models that they discuss have these following 5 points in common. They talk about developing local partnerships to as the crucial foundation for engaging any kind of database work and measurement, creating a battery of indicators, data collection and analysis that involves the local community and also ideally children and adolescents themselves, and spatializing the data for key indicators. And with this, the model, what do you do with the learnings from all these exercises that they actually contribute to strengthening social accountability and governance systems. So the first paper in this, which is by Samantha Coco-Klein and Alberto Minujin, report on a model where teams used multiple data sources and a battery of indicators to measure child well-being down to the neighborhood level. Okubo and his colleagues discussed the Bangkok Small Community Multiple Indicators Survey that was specifically designed to capture data from and about urban poor families who are otherwise invisible in large national survey analysis, and hence these populations are hidden from policymakers. My own paper discusses the case of mapping involving children and adolescents themselves in an urban ward in an Indian city called Kolkata, and using the results of that mapping, using many different, first of all, techniques, including and integrating the findings of the mapping on a GIS platform, and co-creating safe spaces at the level of the urban ward, working with wide-ranging stakeholders and the local government themselves. These are some of the kind of spatialized data maps that I talked about, some of them in chapter 1 and chapter 3 that we present, which actually is a very innovative way of really spatializing inequality in cities. The second part of the book, the theme is making invisible children and youth visible. Here, the chapters talk about the deep challenges of addressing social exclusion by making invisible children, such as disabled children, children living in state care, and how do you make them visible for greater societal integration and inclusion through development. All the chapters in this particular section address SDG 10. It is interesting to note, and this is an insight of this book, a very interesting insight, is that though SDG 1 and its target 1.2, including its indicators 1.2.1 and 1.2.2, which are all aimed at ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, are considered important to children in current development literature. While SDG 10, that deals with equality and more specifically target 10.2 and its indicator 10.2.1 are not considered a child-related indicator, despite the strong interdependence and reinforcing effects of these two SDGs. So the chapters speak to the very conditions of inequality, such as insecure living environments, limited citizenship, spatial disadvantage, limited work opportunities, and social discrimination that deepen poverty and inequality and disadvantage. So the key messages here, the papers strongly underscored the point about the interdependence of the various SDGs, such as SDG 1, 10, 3, 8, etc., and how such an integrated understanding of experiences of inclusion and exclusion in vulnerable young people's lives are crucial to developing policies that impose conditions and reinforce particular SDGs. In the paper by Darkwa and Daniel, this is brilliantly highlighted, how social exclusion of children raised in children's homes in Ghana may reinforce alienation and mental health problems, which in turn would make it harder for them to find employment, and thus increasing the likelihood that they will never escape the poverty trap. Similarly, Katie Hodgkinson and her colleagues report on the findings of their research, multi-country research on social exclusion of youth from care, very similar findings of how interdependent are factors such as accommodation after leaving care, which limits their ability to continue their education and socialize with peers, further deepening the experience of exclusion while keeping these youth in poverty. Segar and her colleagues report on findings from research with disabled adolescents in Bangladesh and Ethiopia. They too find a pattern of interdependent and reinforcing disadvantage for adolescents with impairments ranging across educational attainment, physical and mental health, the experience of violence, voice and agency, and economic empowerment. The third section of the book has the theme social and child protection and child well-being. The papers talk about the challenges of inclusion through social protection and child protection, for children and adolescents living in multidimensional poverty who are especially vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all other forms of violence. The policies for economic growth, equitable education, health, and effective social protection flows can contribute to reducing poverty and inequalities. Target 1.3, which calls for the implementation of nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all to achieve substantial coverage of poor and vulnerable populations, including children, has been referenced in all three papers in this section. The key findings, the key messages are that the SDGs, one of the things before I get into the key findings, one thing that really is one of the most powerful things in the SDGs in relation to child protection is the inclusion of violence and firmly putting it on the development agenda. Violence is considered to be inseparably linked to poverty and inequality in development literature, as we know. Martinez and colleagues actually contribute to this discussion through a very unique perspective. They consider violence, they frame violence as a non-material deprivation of children and youth that compromise quality of life. Hayes and colleagues contribute to this discussion through their study of community-level child protection in Kenya that shows high percentages of children nationwide are experiencing various forms of violence, while very few are able to access protective services. A critical component of the local planning based on this study was to strengthen local child protection systems, referral systems, service provision networks, and mechanisms of accountability. Social protection, as we know, is fundamental to preventing and reducing poverty for children and families and addressing inequality. A new approach that one of the papers present here is about child-sensitive social protection, suggesting that responding to children's vulnerabilities in any social protection program, even if they are not the intended recipients. Machado and Bailo, in their chapter, discuss the findings of a joint research program on child-sensitive, non-contributory social protection programs in the MENA region, where despite a dramatic increase in internal displacement and a refugee crisis, most social protection programs are not accessible to refugees, leaving vulnerable families largely dependent on temporary humanitarian support. They argue the need for appropriate regulatory frameworks that ensure access to a baseline level of social protection by refugees and displaced people to minimize the potential adverse consequences for the most vulnerable children. So that was my overview of the book for you. We hope that you will be able to read the book to know more about these very insightful research across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeshna, for the wonderful overview. And I would also like to invite now Margaret and Enrique, who are also two authors who have contributed to this book, to share some insights on their contributions. Margaret, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. So my the chapter that I'm presenting is actually based on the doctoral research of Ernest Darkwa, who is now Dr. Ernest Darkwa, and he is working at the University of Ghana in Accra. So please be aware that most of this is the data were collected by him, and I'm just doing the presentation of this. Actually, let me just go back to the title. If you look at it, this is the role of context in social exclusion of children. And then we say lessons from children's homes in Ghana. So Ernest did research in various children's homes in 3 different regions of Ghana. And we're going to present some of that here. The context that we're talking about is extremely important, the social and cultural context. And you can see the definition of social exclusion from the United Nations actually names those two things. Okay, it's a state in which individuals are unable to participate fully in economic, social, political, and cultural life. And then it's also the processes leading up to that kind of exclusion. So first of all, a little bit about the social context within Ghana regarding children. The UNCRC stands for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this has been, it's one of the most widely ratified conventions in the world. And Ghana ratified it, was one of the very first countries to ratify it and included it in its Children's Act 560. In practice, at a local community level, it's very interesting because people don't really accept this. So although it's been ratified by the government, people still want to raise their children the Ghanaian way. And the clashes come in terms of how people perceive children, how they think children should interact with adults, and expectations of how children should behave. When it comes to children's homes in Ghana, the government regards these as a last resort alternative care measure. And the caregivers who look after the children in these homes are known as mothers, and they are obliged to follow the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the study focused on two particular aspects of social exclusion in the context of Ghana. And the first was, what is the role of this international law and the norms associated with child rights? And what is the role of adult expectations? So our research questions were, how are children homes children received in their local social context? And how do adult perceptions of children's homes children in the Ghanaian context affect the children's chances of being included or excluded? So first of all, taking the first one, our first aim, the perceptions of children's homes children within the sociocultural context. And these were overwhelmingly negative. Children from children's homes are regarded as a bad influence. So this quotation comes from a teacher who witnessed a mother, a local mother, not from the children's home, chasing away one of the children from the children's home. And she didn't want them to play with her children. So the teacher says, when I saw her reaction to the kid from the children's home, I was angry and I questioned her. She said she suffers to take care of her children and wants them to behave properly like Ghanaian children. And she didn't want any foreign bad influence from those spoiled children that we raise in the children's homes. So you can see this perception of them being foreign. And another mother had said something about she didn't want her children to play with the children's home children because the kids in the children's home had far more toys and material possessions because of all the money coming from outside. Another finding was that the children from the children's home were not fit for the cultural environment. And an auntie, so this is somebody who sometimes relieves a mother in the children's home, said these children barely know our culture. Sometimes they don't even greet adults. All they know is eat and play and sleep. So they often regarded as, you know, not knowing the values and the norms of Ghanaian society. And a third finding was that these children are lazy and disrespectful. And you can see that this quote comes from a former child who had lived in a children's home. And she's now come back to volunteer in the children's home. And this is what she said. I was lonely often because everyone shunned my company, that I was lazy and I don't respect. The problem is I didn't know exactly what I was doing that was disrespectful. So here you can see that she didn't understand the norms. Other quotes that we've got in the chapter show that children from children's homes don't take instruction, they don't obey, and this is why they are not well regarded. Concerning the findings of our second aim or research question, how do community perceptions influence children's chances of being excluded or being included? Well, again, they are pretty negative. Many lead to alienation of these children. And here you can see it's a mother in one of the children's homes who's saying this. The way we use children's rights in this institution will harm children when they go out there. All the mothers know this, but everyone's afraid to talk for fear of losing their jobs. And it's interesting because we've got another quote in the chapter which shows a social worker saying, if only mothers could blend Ghanaian parenting styles a little bit, then the children would do better. And then she adds, but we have to obey the rules. A second finding related to this was the children are not likely to be included. Our children here are not spoken of as good children. So I think their inclusion in local communities would be hampered when they finally leave this place. These children get talked of as white people's children, special children, you know, and badly behaved children. So that these things make them sound foreign, not easily going to be accepted and included when they leave the home. In fact, many of them already have experienced rejection from the communities. So this is a quote from a manager at a children's home who said, you know, we've had kids who've gone out to be with foster parents and the foster parents have returned them and said, we don't want these kids because they challenge our authority and they do not show any respect. So rejection already while they are living in the home and probably when they leave the home. And another finding in relation to this potential for inclusion or exclusion is that they are stigmatized. And again, this is a former child who lived in the children's home who is now volunteering there. Because you are from a children's home, everyone treats you different. It's like everyone is watching you for your mistakes to confirm their already negative expectations and perceptions of institutional children. You feel stigmatized. So what does all this mean for the inclusion of children? Just to summarize the findings briefly, the staff in children's homes feel obliged to raise foreign children who know their rights. But the community perception of children's home children is overwhelmingly negative and children are rejected. The implications, it's very interesting. Although Ghana has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, those rights are not widely practiced in the general community, okay? They would rather have Ghanaian children, what they call Ghanaian children, who respect and obey adults, who take responsibility. And this is more in line with the African Charter on the Rights and Well-being of the Child, the ACRWC. A more serious implication is that these children who live in children's homes are at high risk for further exclusion when leaving care. They lack sociocultural competence. They don't know how to behave in a Ghanaian way. They are already stigmatized and rejected as spoilt or foreign, and when they go out, the same thing happens. When relating to the SDGs, this has it undermines, this kind of exclusion undermines the value of the SDGs. When people are excluded, you're not reducing inequalities or you know, improving mental health and well-being or promoting employment opportunities or eliminating poverty. So what can we learn? Our subtitle was Lessons From. What can we learn? First of all, the things in that definition of social inclusion, the social and the cultural context are extremely important. We need to take those into account. We need to consider potential harm caused by well-intentioned interventions. And we also need to take a long-term perspective. What we're doing in the home is going to affect these children when they leave the home. Can we co-create solutions? The definition talks about participation. So could we think about processes like, how is it that the mothers learn about child rights? Are they trying to implement the wrong version of child rights? Can the children in children's homes learn Ghanaian norms and values like the social worker suggested? And can the resources be shared more equitably so that mothers who didn't want her children playing with these children, her children could also benefit? So just in conclusion, this title, Leaving No Child and No Adolescent Behind, this is a very bold target, and there are bound to be some failures along the way. So we need to be open to learn from those failures, respecting the socio-cultural context and also considering long-term implications and potential harm. So my final statement is just this. Through genuine local participation, let us discover what enables children to grow into thriving adults within their own contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, for a really exciting presentation. And it's really nice to see examples from the book and what kind of issues are discussed in different chapters of the book, and really important matters. Enrique, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm almost ready. I need to say 3 things before I start. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really, really happy to be here. Second, unfortunately, I need to leave a few minutes early, so please do not take it as a sign of disrespect if I have to leave before we wrap up all the session and all the Q&A. Thirdly, I'm having serious challenges with my computer. You might have seen my face and the camera going in and out. I am also connected on the phone. I hope you don't hear a lot of background. My computer just crashed 2 minutes ago. I hope I'll be able to share the screen and show my few slides. Let's hope everything works properly. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Now the thing is whether it moves. Yes, it does. So let me start by saying a little bit what is the background of this analysis, which looks at material deprivation and non-material deprivation, as Sudeshna so clearly described in her wonderful presentation of the overall book. When we look at children and we look at child poverty, we have an issue because mostly the analysis and the numbers is done out of households which are poor, whether they are classified as poor because there is not enough income, or there is some sort of multidimensional index of elements in the household, then we say the household is poor. Consequently, these children ought to be poor, and they usually are. However, that approach makes children invisible, because there are children suffering serious deprivations, multiple deprivations, material and non-material deprivations, outside those households pre-classified as poor by whichever means. So what we need to do is to analyze child poverty specifically based on data of individual children. And that raises the question, what is child poverty? How we define child poverty? We are in Unicef and we follow the convention that Margaret has so well described, the Convention of the Rights of the Child. That's what guides us, our work. Unfortunately, throughout the world, everywhere, every time, there are a lot of child rights violations, some really gruesome and tragic, but it would be a stretch, an incorrect stretch, of the word poverty as it is usually understood by laypersons or in any of the academic literature, whether it's sociology, human rights, economics, anthropology, to think that all rights violations constitute poverty. Only a subset of those deprivations that require material resources for their realization. That is what poverty is about. Other things, lack of privacy, child labor, teen pregnancy, terrible, bad things that happen to children, but that's not poverty in its basic understanding. Now, there are also issues of income. Now, income is a separate conversation. I can get into that in the Q&A. But in the child poverty world, there is a lot of misunderstanding about these other rights that obviously we want to analyze for children, but are not really poverty in the way it is usually understood. So the paper tries to answer that question. But before I do that, let me tell you that the way we analyze child poverty in UNICEF, and we have done this globally using severe thresholds, moderate thresholds, we know children that have difficulties or challenges realizing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or simultaneously all of them. We have disaggregation by sex, by location, the intersectionality. We know that rural girls are more than twice as likely as an urban boy to be poor globally. We do it geographically. And this is based on equally weighted dimensions that are coming out of the SDG framework, because we looked at the child's education, health, housing situation, nutrition, sanitation, and water. These are the things that we can measure. But there are a lot of other things that are important to children, a lot of them. And in the quality of life literature and in other approaches, some people like the capabilities approach, it would be sort of similar. There are other ways of thinking of time poverty. There are issues of the social relations that involve the emergence and sustainability of poverty. So there's relational poverty. There are a lot of ways to think about poverty beyond the material resources. The premise of the article is that, important as these dimensions are, they are substantively different from the material deprivations. So how could we measure all of it while maintaining the distinction of things which are material and non-material? So we looked at these domains, which are listed there: community engagement, neglect, safety, family relationships, interaction, safety, violence, emotional well-being, many of which are related specifically to SDGs. So this allows us to keep on tracking and understanding what's happening with the SDGs. And they were selected not because they are the most important one, not because they are the most salient or the ones where there are more difficulties. We selected these for very, very practical reasons. These indicators are available in household surveys that allow us to combine the information with child poverty based on the material deprivations. And the results of that, and there are 4 countries that are in the chapter, but we have continued the work since the chapter or the book was published. So we are doing this for other countries. This is 2 examples to show you the kind of information we could get. In green, you see in 2 countries, Sierra Leone, it's unfortunately a small number. Suriname, fortunately, is more than half of the children in the country are okay. They are okay means they are not suffering from material deprivations, and they are also not suffering from the non-material deprivations, like not having time to play with their parents or receive homework support, or they are not happy with their friends, etc. Children that are having facing both of these issues is in red, 17% in one country, 25% in another one. And then we can also see the children that, quote unquote, are only suffering material deprivations or only facing challenges in the non-material deprivations, many of which are child rights and many of which are also SDGs. And we hope this is a good summary way to keep track of what's happening with various SDGs that affect children directly and analyzing them simultaneously. I hope my time is not overrun, that we're within time, and I close here. Over to you.
Thank you, Enrique. So yeah, thank you both Enrique and Margaret for sharing the insights on your contributions to the book, as that really gives us a deeper understanding on the various topics and findings discussed in the book. And today we also have Thomas George with us, who has extensive experience in various policies from the UN system. So now I give the word to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you see my slide?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, and greetings to everyone from Unicef. I'm happy to speak after my good friend and colleague, Enrique. So my presentation is on bringing your focus to the poor children living in poor urban settings all over the world. So as you know, our planet became an urban planet in 2012 with more than half of the people living in urban areas. So we estimate that there are about, say, 1.2 billion children living in urban areas. But what I want to highlight here is that of the 1.2 billion, more than 350 million children live in slums and informal settlements. And this is a figure which is set to double by 2030 and maybe triple by 2050. So what does that mean? It means that now 1/6 of the population live in slums, or 1/6 of the population of children live in slums. It'll become 1/4 by 2030 and be 1/3 by 2050. So that's to set the context. What are the reasons? Rapid urbanization, mostly in Asia and Africa. And we also know that a majority of refugees and internally displaced people gravitate towards the urban areas and usually end up in the poor urban settings there. There are millions of children living in areas affected by conflict. I can't put a clear number to that, but we all know that there are conflict areas all over the world, and there are many, many children living there. And the latest I heard is that at least 13,000 children are killed every year from explosive weapons in conflict areas, and they're mostly in urban areas. And there are many more who are disabled, and they are affected by the break-in services and so on. And then there are children living on the street. They are not even part of a household. Again, the estimates of children living in the street vary a lot depending on who is looking at the data. But I can say with confidence that there are many such children living on the street. The problem with urban is that the urban averages look good compared to rural, but the fact we have to consider is that urban averages mask the inequities. So Unicef did an analysis of a few indicators, around 10 of them, from 70 countries, and we found that in almost half of these countries, the urban poor were worse off than the rural population. Because generally, when you just compare urban and rural, you find that the urban averages are much better, and we generally try to tend to focus on rural. This is primarily also the reason why largely during the MDG era, UNICEF was a rural organization. Only in the last 4 or 5 years, we have restarted our programs in urban, and which is stepping up now. It was also interesting to see that in maybe about 15 to 25% of the countries, depending on which indicator or which outcome you're looking at, the urban poor were worse off than the rural poor even. So that's really a cause for concern, and we need to look at it in the right earnest. So looking at the huge numbers of children living in urban poor settings, and the fact that most in many countries or in many settings, they are worse off than the rural counterparts, we have to kind of come to the point that achieving SDGs or realizing the rights of children will not be possible without addressing the prevailing inequalities in urban areas. And that's a message which we need to shout out, because that's something I think is still not really understood and acted on by most of the partners. So I'll come here like what can be done at this point in time. As I said before, this is something which is not widely known, not widely accepted, except in gatherings like this where people are aware of the situation, people talk about it. But in the larger urban discourse, this is not happening, and in the larger child rights discourse, this is still not happening well. So first thing to do is to highlight this problem and make sure that it kind of the message goes down to countries, to cities. For anybody who's working on development, I think this is something which they have to look into. The second one is on inclusion of the issue of poor children or poor urban children in the urban policies, global as well as national and maybe even local, and the many frameworks which are in the making. So, there is a good beginning that has been made in the urban monitoring framework, which is being finalized or being submitted to the UN Statistical Commission in March this year, which is the next month. 8 child-related indicators have been included in the urban monitoring framework, and there are many other child-sensitive indicators, and we hope to see that being implemented in countries and in cities. When we are talking about programming, as I said before, there has to be a special focus on children in slums and informal settlements and in conflict areas. We all know that the issues of children of slums and informal settlements is not the same as of the other areas. The deprivations are more. The reasons for why services do not reach there are different. The strategy, what is needed, is different. They have weak public systems, they have weak outreach systems. So how do you focus on that and how to strategize to reach these children, especially in a local setup? As I said before, again, the urban monitoring framework. This should not remain as a framework which is like only global, but how do you use that in countries and in cities? How do you use that to define the full length of the programs that has to reach children, and how to implement that? How can you create how can we encourage every city or every country to have a situation analysis based on the indicator framework and then work towards addressing the issues there? The last point is on strengthening the localized response. We know that the governments closest to the people are the local governments, and how can they be empowered to address the issues that come up in their geographical area. So the first one is on intra-urban data. As I said before, the urban averages mask inequity, so it is very important that the planners and the policymakers are able to drill down into the urban data to see where are the pockets of poverty, where are the pockets of deprivation, and be able to address them. The second one is on using this data to develop plans and to budget for them. Many a time you find that the planning is based on the budget available, but how can local governments plan based on outcomes and use the intra-urban data analysis to develop their plans? In most situations, participation of children and poor communities is a challenge. So how can we ensure that these two vulnerable groups are made to participate in the development programs? How can we include them in the planning process? How can we include them in monitoring the services and so on? The fourth point is on coordination and oversight of basic services. We all know that in most countries, especially in developing countries, the accountabilities at the lowest level is not very clearly defined sometimes. Sometimes it could be with the local government, sometimes it could be with the deconcentrated levels of the national government, sometimes it could be a third-party vehicle which is delivering these services. So how can the local governments take the lead in coordinating and providing oversight to the delivery of basic services? The last point here is on partnerships. This is such a complex situation that not just one local government or one ministry or one department or one organization can do it. It needs the support of everybody. You need to bring in a lot of stakeholders, including, as I said earlier, local governments, deconcentrated levels of national governments, third-party special purpose vehicles which provide, let's say, for instance, water services, civil society organizations, and definitely the private sector, as private sector is also a major player in in this area. So I stop there, and I look forward to taking questions in the question and answer session. Over.
Thank you, Thomas. It's also really interesting to have an input from the policy view on these issues, and it's really nice. Now I'll give a word to Alberto, who will take us through a Q&A session with the audience. So if anybody has questions, please post them in the chat function.
Well, thank you very much. And there's comments and questions that I think that are important. And I have some of the questions also myself. So I want to start with a comment by Lorena to Margaret about how the lens that the academic look at the things should change at the light of what you were commenting. And after that, we will move to a question that we have for Thomas and Sudeshna, and I have some questions for for all of you. Please, Margaret.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment, Lorena. It is so true that I think we really, and it's been mentioned by some of the other speakers as well, that participation from local populations can really help us understand context. So I think it's really important that we learn from failures. When we think things haven't worked, and we then include participation of local people to say, how can we do this better? What could be done? And I think, for example, the example I mentioned, the social worker sort of said, can we include some Ghanaian parenting, methods? And then she said, no, because of the rules. But if we had people sitting around and chatting and bringing those kinds of things in, I think it would be possible to find a way of solving some of those issues. So yes, I hope that sort of expands a little bit on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So there is a question for Thomas and Sudeshna about the issue of visibility and invisibility of inequalities. And they are asking if you can comment a bit more. And also I would add if Enrique can comment about non-material deprivation, if we are underestimating a lot child poverty when we don't take in account non-material deprivation. So we have the question of invisibility, but it's linked to non-material deprivation too. Yes, please, Enrique, you are.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. I hope Sudeshna and Thomas, you don't mind if I answer as I mentioned at the beginning. I have to leave it in a couple of minutes. Yes and no, Alberto. We do and we do not underestimate. I think we have, if we understand clearly that these are different concepts which are important to look at together and to combine, and poverty is about material deprivation, then we do not underestimate it by not including the non-material. What we are doing is not counting important things for children. And we have to be aware that that's what we do. They are different. We need to count both. There is, however, underestimation of child poverty, even the way we do it with the material deprivation, because we don't have sufficient data in the household surveys to properly assess the situation in all the material deprivation dimensions that child poverty constitutes. And that's why UNICEF is involved and asking for collaboration and support from others to try to expand and improve on the data gathering surveys and questionnaires, etc., so that we include all the material deprivations. And finally, if I may also touch upon the point on participation that came out earlier and that Margaret alluded to, it's also important to include the voices of children properly when analyzing, understanding, and measuring child poverty. And these ranges from more qualitative things like how do children experience poverty, but also to take their views into account when we say, well, these are the material deprivations that children suffer from. These are the minima that children consider they should have in all of these dimensions. And I think all of us, including UNICEF, all of us need to do more work to take those voices properly into account. Let me stop here. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Alberto.
Thank you very much. So Sudeshna and Thomas, please, on the invisibility.
Yes. Typically, invisible children are the children who are often not counted in typical surveys, censuses, who sort of fall through the gaps. In our book, the groups that are most notable are children with disabilities, children who are migrating, new migrants to cities, children who are internally displaced, refugee children, as well as children who are living in a lot of institutional setups. Other than that, there are also children who are not accounted for in policies so much that lift the typical child welfare boats are children who are undertaking labor as domestic helps, who are absolutely not visible in the public realm. Similarly, there are also children who are living in very, very precarious urban environments in squatter settlements that have no kind of social security flows. These are the most vulnerable. So these categories of children are considered the most disadvantaged because of their invisibility in typical measurements and policies. Yeah, over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the question of invisibility is relative. In my experience in the last 2-3 years, whenever you are at a global conference or a global seminar or a global webinar on urban, rarely does the issue of slum children come up. Maybe because usually you have people from the first world either living in the US or Europe, mostly at the table, and very less participation from the developing South. And that is and the issues which come up are about air pollution or sidewalks, safe streets, cycling. But the issues of slum children don't come up. So how do you make that visible? I think you have to start by, as I said earlier, making this issue talked about, more. So to get more people to talk about it, there has to be more and more data which is needed. So with the help of UN Habitat, we have now got the estimates of how many children live in slums in 40 countries. And in most of the countries, it's between 30 to 70% of children living in urban areas. So that's not something which was not known earlier, but again, it was like global figures. So how can we, my next point is, how do we localize data? You have to, it's one thing to say that there are 350 million children living in slums and informal settlements, but you have to maybe take it down to the lower levels. So in each country, how many children are living in slums? And then to each city, how many children are living in slums? So I would say my first point is strengthening intra-urban data. And the second point is on localizing data. How do you localized data, which can be then used for planning, programming, advocacy purposes. The third point is on qualitative data. You know, the issues of children who are living in slums or informal settlements or precarious urban settings could be very different. You know, in some cities, it could be refugees from with no citizenship status. In some cities, it could be more of internally displaced people. In some cities, it could be linguistic minorities, maybe coming from another part of the country. So it varies. So how can we have more qualitative data at the local level, which is more granular, which can highlight the issues at the local level? The last point is on participation. You know, even when we say that there is people's participation or local level participation, it's usually the elite or the cream of the community there, which get a chance to participate. So how can policymakers and other stakeholders make it a mission to ensure that the children and the poor communities participate in this dialogue? I think these are ways of making it visible. As I said before, this problem has to be made visible at different levels for different purposes. Over.
Well, thank you very much, Enrique, Sudeshna, Thomas, and Margaret. I think that the question of making visible, and Thomas, you make a point that is important, that is how to localize the information, because many times we work with some average or inequalities, but we don't localize. It's different to say, well, the gap between the rich and the poor is this, and the other is to say, you know what, in this area, particular area, in this neighborhood, you have this and these problems, and this is the data, and this how to localize is a problem that is important to make this visible. So I think that one of the things that they are asking is how to engage children and youth in the SDGs. And I don't know, anyone want to comment about this? Yes, please, Margaret.
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, if you think about Greta Thunberg and climate change, she's completely triggered a youth movement right around the world. And the reason for that is that she's so relatable to children. You know, so I think if we can find young people who can talk on the particular SDGs, you know, and meet others who are the same age group as them, they become, you know, they can relate to them, because it's not some old grandmother like me talking about the issue, but it's somebody they can really understand, who's giving examples that are relevant to them. And, you know, I just think we need Greta Thunberg in each one of the SDGs.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So one thing that I was thinking, maybe Sudeshna, you can, because the book, our book is, as you say, the title, Leaving No Children and No Adolescents Behind. And as Lorena said, it's a target, it's a tough target. And with the pandemic, the estimation is that many million of more children are poor, and especially in areas, in urban areas, many children are behind. No, the school is the migration, the fact that the children leave the house and migrate to the home without the elements to be learning, make the situation even worse. So what do you think? Is the book behind what we are thinking, or the book is in a good moment to be exactly to start and pushing for that? What do you think about that? Sudeshna, maybe you can comment.
Yeah. So see, some of the messages in the book, which I think are very relevant, especially in the context of the pandemic, of this whole idea of not just looking at material poverty, but also non-material poverty and the interrelationship of poverty and inequality. For example, the household income may have gone up in some households, and that may be because the children were begging in the streets, or the children were engaging in hazardous labor to bring in more money. So if you just have an income-based way of looking at poverty reduction, it's not going to work. So particularly in the context of the pandemic, what we saw, inequality deepened. And that is where we need to really talk about the interdependency of a lot of these SDGs, that they are not in silos, not to be seen as a sectoral thing, or, we need to talk about these things in an integrated manner. So a lot of the policy prescriptions that's coming up for, social welfare needs to really understand for children that this material, non-material deprivation, as well as which includes, particularly in the urban context, not just housing, but also, issues of climate change, issues of access to safe public spaces, which we saw became so important during the pandemic, road safety. And there are cities which are stepping up now across the world. In my current work that we're seeing, at least in India, city governments are investing a lot on road safety for children at this point, and they're scaling up programs after the pandemic. Also because in India, we had some of the longest school closures, almost 2 years of no schooling. So when children are going back to school, a lot of different thinking. So they are much more conscious about the environment at this point and creating safer, cleaner, healthier environments for children. So it was a wake-up call, but like Margaret said, that child advocacy and children and young people as advocates, that role is also being seen as a prime role for children within local government. So strengthening of voices, creating those spaces for participation, and a lot of models exist, but that space really needs to be expanded, and really asking children that what do they want to see changed in their lives, in their schools, in their homes, in their neighborhoods going forward as they are coming out of the experience of the pandemic.
Thank you very much. I want the other one to comment about that, but Lorena sent just a comment. She said, I find the book is really pertinent and could have a higher impact should we use some of this conclusion out of the academia to have some impact and discussion with the government on this regard. But I want your comment on these things, Margaret and Thomas.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with that, but I think the difficulty is that we've gone global. We've collected chapters from all over the world. So which governments and which NGOs and so on. I mean, perhaps organizations, well, Unicef, you've got the information, and I don't know if it can be spread through Unicef, but other humanitarian organizations working with children, like Save the Children, should we send multiple copies to them? But you're absolutely right. This knowledge shouldn't be kept in academia. This knowledge should be spread to the practice world as well, and to the policy world.
Okay, thank you.
Thomas? Yeah, quick question, quick response. First on the participation bit. Child participation is a very good subject to talk about, but very difficult to implement. Politicians are usually not interested in children because they're not voters. So, and in most countries, participation of people is part of the law, part of the constitution, but participation of children is not. So it becomes doubly difficult for children to participate. So I think it needs a lot of champions, a lot of people who are working on a mission mode to ensure that child participation is a reality in cities and slowly, I think we need to find ways of institutionalizing it so that then, there is a systemic backup for that. On the second question of how the suggestions in the book can be used for policy, I think this is an ongoing process. In my 30 years of experience, I have not come across a time when research directly translates into policy. I think research, there is a huge gap there, which has to be how you disseminate the findings of the research. And I think people generally don't put resources in disseminating the findings of the research. I think that should be something which should be taken up in right earnest. And at the moment, we are working with UN Habitat to see how children's issues can be integrated into national urban policies. So this is an area, this is an opportunity for us to take the findings of the book and use it in that work. And if there are any specific suggestions, feel free to write to us, share it with us, and we can use that. Over. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think that we have a very good presentation of the book. I am very happy of being in Bergen presenting this book, and I give the floor to Elina for the closing of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. And on behalf of GRIP, I would like to thank you all for the insightful discussion. Special thanks to our distinguished panelists, Sudeshna, Alberto, Margaret, Enrique, and Thomas. It was a true pleasure to hear your input and views on such important subject as child and adolescent poverty and exclusion. And I think that this event really touched upon many important topics, such as significance of disaggregated local data in understanding the local realities, and the importance of the context as underlined by Margaret, and also the discussion on how to tackle invisibility of inequality, which is of course a key challenge if we wish to develop policies that actually work, and as well as material and non-material deprivation and the various dimensions of it, and participation of children, as highlighted by the last discussions. So I truly hope that we can continue conversation on these topics also off the screen and contribute to the advancement of knowledge on inequalities and the SDGs. And at the end, I just would also like to add that the book Leaving No Child and No Adolescent Behind will be available as open access source, as Alberto mentioned in the beginning, and it will be available from the 14th of March, so in about a month. And please follow GRIP both on social media and our website for more information on open access announcement and information that will be posted there. So once again, thank you all for joining us and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for this.
Thank you, Elena.
To all the participants. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.